Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone, which you already know also means it is the birthday of the Army of Spies. And on this third birthday, I thought it might be a great time for us to talk about the first principles thinking behind this Cardano bet we've all taken. If your reaction is, whoa, 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 my friend, I don't think I've placed any bets whatsoever, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. 3 years ago today, I started this channel intentionally on St. Patrick's Day because, as everyone readily acknowledges, St. Patrick's Day is the most important day of the year. And if you've been around this channel for any length of time, you probably already know a couple of things about this channel. And that's that the Army of Spies is not me, it's all of us together. And the reason it has always had to be that way is that this channel is about ideas. It's not about any single person, just like I think Cardano is not about any single person. There are some prominent, there's a prominent individual and some other prominent individuals, but Cardano, I think, also is intentionally not about any single person or personality. There are big personalities, but it's not really about that. It's more about some ideas, some fundamental ideas that come from some first principles thinking. And so, on a day like today, the 3-year birthday of the Army of Spies, I think it's a good idea to go back and talk about the first principles thinking that led a lot of us. I would wager a very large percentage of the people listening to this video, it led them to make some kind of bet on Cardano. It might have been money, it might have been time, it might have been energy, enthusiasm, but something. If you listen to these videos, you've probably invested something into Cardano. And I think the interesting part about that is that the same reasons that a lot of us made that initial bet, the same reason we got involved in this ecosystem in one way or another, I think those exact same fundamental ideas that come from first principles thinking, I think the same ideas that existed back then are still 100% operative today. And most interestingly, the information asymmetry around those ideas is kind of still the same today that it was back then. I think we still hold this giant information asymmetry advantage over a lot of other people, not just in the mainstream, but in crypto, which is kind of amazing because Cardano's been around for a long time now. I first started buying ADA in 2018 when it was single digit cents. Cardano was under 10 cents in 2018 or thereabouts when I was buying it. And at the time, I was amazed. I was amazed that the price was so low and there seemed to be so little heat on Cardano. And the only conclusion I could come to was people aren't seeing the same thing I'm seeing. They just don't know. They just don't know what's going on here. So, what were these fundamental ideas around the Cardano bet? Here's how it worked for me. It was obvious to me that blockchains and cryptocurrency produced better money. We won't go into all the reasons that is true. We've covered it a million times on this channel. Bitcoin seemed like a better money, but it also seemed like a good idea to add more functionality. It seemed like there was some more functionality we could get out of blockchains. That part seemed obvious. People were already talking about colored coins back in the early days. Even in when I got in that 2012, 2013, 2014 period, people were talking about colored coins and there were already altcoins and there were other ideas about how we could take blockchains further than just this very, very sound money that made sense from an Austrian economics perspective that we had in Bitcoin. And along came Ethereum. Ethereum added smart contracts, and everybody knew it made sense. It was a good idea. Granted, you can make very good arguments that blockchains make terrible computation layers, at least the way they're generally laid out. They're not great at doing a lot of things. They're very bad for storing things. They make bad hard drives. Your blockchain is not a good hard drive. It is also not great for computation, but smart contracts seem to make sense. There were some other problems. How do we still solve the blockchain trilemma? How do we get high levels of decentralization, scaling, and security, and also add on all this other computation that goes on with smart contracts? After Ethereum launched, it was obvious smart contracts were very useful. They did add some functionality, and that functionality was valuable. Ethereum, of course, it was the value in Ethereum was obvious right off the bat. Smart contracts, we could do things with them. But it was also obvious that, as people expected, we were running into problems on the scaling leg of the blockchain trilemma. All this extra computation was a problem, especially when we were just using proof of work, which itself involved intensive, hardware intensive computation to decide who's going to validate the next block. Already we were in this era where people were constructing warehouses full of application specific integrated circuits, ASICs, and everybody could already see this was going to be bad for decentralization because your average person at home was not going to be able to compete with these warehouses full of ASICs. So there was a problem. Proof of work, blockchains, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency all seemed great. Smart contracts also seemed great. Fundamentally, these things all seem like a good idea. Crypto was a great improvement over fiat currency. Smart contracts were a great addition to crypto, but we started running into these problems. Proof of work, great for Bitcoin, but maybe there was a better way to do it, especially when we're adding on the computational burden of smart contracts. So people, even from the early days of Ethereum, already, of course, talking about proof of stake. And the way they were talking about proof of stake was exactly the way you would talk about proof of stake if you understood at all what a stake is. If when you were a little kid, you bet someone something and they said, "What are you going to stake?" It meant, hey, what are you willing to lose? If you think you're so correct about this thing, what are you willing to lose? What is your stake here? Inherent in that idea, at least the way we normally use that term in English, is that you can lose the stake. So of course, if you set up a proof of stake system, the natural easy thing, the way you would design it, if someone just explained to you what proof of stake was and they said, hey, just design that on paper for me, you would probably have the person losing their stake, because that's what the term usually implies, the way we normally use it in everyday English. You'd have them losing their stake if they did something you don't want them to do. And of course, that's the way Ethereum was obviously planning on setting up their proof of stake system. This seemed a little problematic, right? Just from a fundamental basis. In mining of Bitcoin, you might invest in the wrong type of ASIC. The technology involved in your ASIC might be too old by the time you get it, and maybe it's not an effective miner or something like that. But you don't like put up a bunch of money, on chain and have it get deleted from you if you do a bad job mining. So the way proof of stake was planned to be set up already seemed kind of problematic. People were like, wait a second. So you think everybody's going to want to participate in this if they could actually lose their crypto? Like, just in order to participate in this, they're going to have to risk losing their crypto. That is obviously, from a fundamental perspective, that's obviously going to lead to a smaller number of people, a smaller population of people are going to be willing to participate in this whole proof of stake system. And already at that time, we already knew at that time that proof of work, at least in the case of Bitcoin, had led to intensive decentralization. The whole point of, at least I think a lot of us thought, the whole point of Bitcoin was decentralization. And what we'd seen is that proof of work had led to massive centralization. We know that's still true today from the Nakamoto coefficient of Bitcoin. It's very, very low. A small group of actors. There are mining pools, and you can make different nuanced arguments about that, but it's a small group of parties that control validation in Bitcoin. So we already knew proof of work leads to centralization, at least as it's done in Bitcoin. You can make other arguments for other proof of work systems, but proof of stake comes along And what we see is it has this big problem, this slashing problem, which is what they were calling it when they were proposing how they were going to delete your money if you did anything they didn't want you to. So we already knew that was going to be a problem because proof of stake obviously had this potential to democratize the validation of blockchains. You could get a whole lot more people involved. You could get maybe everybody in the ecosystem involved. What if in Bitcoin, the initial thought you had back in those days was, oh, this is so interesting. What if in Bitcoin I could participate in mining without actually having to buy mining hardware? What if I didn't have to buy an ASIC and I could still get some of those mining rewards? That sounds fantastic as an average person in crypto. And of course, proof of stake had the potential to actually do that because there weren't going to be the same intensive hardware requirements. You weren't going to have to buy racks and racks of ASICs in a warehouse somewhere that also had access to very cheap energy. Those are very big demands. And in the early days, back in those days of Bitcoin, we all heard the stories that guys were setting up these kinds of warehouses next to hydroelectric producing dams in China where they could bribe the dam operators to give them free electricity. Very hard for the average person to compete with that in their basement in, name your rural area in any part of the Western world. Very hard to compete with that in your basement, in your mom's basement or whatever. But proof of stake could be different because it wasn't going to have those intensive hardware requirements. Sure, the stake pools themselves would have to run a little hardware, of some type. They'd either have to rent or have hardware they were going to use for running the stake pool, but it wasn't going to be this crazy racks and racks and warehouses full of ASICs using so much electricity that you'd actually want to put it next to a dam where you could bribe the dam operator. It wasn't going to be that kind of thing. It's going to be a much smaller hardware requirement. So, given all that, why would you then choose this slashing system that was going to cut against the participation of everybody in the ecosystem? Because no matter how you dress it up, no matter how much makeup you put on this thing, if people are given choice between, hey, you can participate in staking and you'll make a little money, but you could lose all your money, or you can participate in staking and maybe you'll make a little money and there's no risk of slashing. People are always going to choose that second one. And if you want to know which one is going to get more of the ecosystem involved, it's definitely going to be that second one because there are always going to be people who are going to not want to risk losing all of their crypto. I was among those people when I first realized how Ethereum was going to run proof of stake. I immediately knew I was not going to be willing to risk my crypto in a staking system that had slashing. The problem with, and so this all sounds great, right? You think about this and you're like, okay, so obviously the proof of stake systems that didn't have slashing, they were going to be the ones that were going to win. This is so patently obvious. This is fundamental. This is extremely obvious which one of those is going to be preferential. But that obviously wasn't the case back in 2018 when I was buying for single digit cents, when I was buying ADA for single digit cents. There was obviously an information asymmetry. And I don't blame people for not being on the comprehending side of that information asymmetry because it sounds ridiculous. Proof of stake system, but we don't have slashing. It sounds ridiculous. The first time I heard of this, I thought definitely that won't work. Sounds great. Probably won't work. They probably got a super stupid idea about how they're going to make that work, and it won't work. And that's a big part of why ADA was so cheap back in 2018 because there was this information asymmetry. Some of us we're already understanding that there was going to be this huge body of academic literature explaining how this was going to work in even more detail. Cardano, from the very start, was very focused on peer-reviewed literature. And I think that's because the founders of Cardano understood that nobody was going to buy this idea. A proof-of-stake system without slashing sounds ridiculous. So they did what we do in science in the modern world, and that's peer-reviewed literature. That's how science works. And they were like, hey, this is really science. So we're going to do this the way you do it in science through peer-reviewed literature, because then all of the academics who study this kind of thing can come in and tell us if we're wrong. And if none of them can tell us how this is wrong, then the world will understand that this is actually a better way to do proof of stake and still satisfy the blockchain trilemma. So they did that. Cardano did that. They produced papers upon papers upon papers. It got so ridiculous. People were making songs about all of our papers in Cardano. That's how intensely they papered up all of these fundamental ideas about this thing, this proof of stake system with no slashing. And guess what happened? People didn't read the papers. Us in Cardano, we read the papers, but nobody else read the papers because this idea is fundamentally a huge threat to all the proof of stake systems that use slashing. If you're in a proof of stake system that's slashing, if you've invested money, time, effort, enthusiasm into one of those systems like Ethereum, you don't want to hear about proof of stake with no slashing because it's obviously better. It's fundamentally better. Anyone would choose it over the other system. So you don't want to hear about it. So you're not going to read those papers if you're not doing first principles thinking. If you're just like, hey, I'm not doing first principles thinking, I'm with the herd. I'm with the flock over there. I just stay inside the flock because I am too intellectually lazy to investigate things like this on a first principles basis. I'm going to stay within the herd. I'm going to go where they go, and they'll probably be safe. Going where the herd goes in crypto so far in those days, in the early days, because we'd had Bitcoin and Ethereum, and there had been a lot of other ways to lose all your money and waste your time. There were ecosystems that definitely went bust or went nowhere. But if you were one of those people who got involved with Bitcoin and then you got involved with Ethereum, you probably looked around and said, hey, all of us now in Ethereum, we were all the old Bitcoin guys. Bitcoin was great. Ethereum's going to be great too. And when they do proof of stake, that's going to be great too. This is the wisdom of the herd. I'm staying right here. And then Cardano published all the papers, and they also didn't read the papers. The herd decided they would not read those papers. They were not going to satisfy any intellectual curiosity there. They were just going to reject all that. And the information asymmetry has persisted to this day. To this day, you can talk to someone and say, hey, don't you think it would be a good idea for us to do proof of stake that doesn't have slashing? If it's possible, if it works. And the responses you're most commonly going to get if they're on the other side of the spectrum, on the other side of this argument, they're just going to say, it doesn't really work. It's all a scam. That's the wrong way to do it. And you're going to ask them what fault they find in the many, many papers that the entire academic community was unable to find. And they're just going to repeat to you that it's all a scam, it's all fraud, it's not worth investigating because they're sticking with the herd. They're not investigating. They're not doing first principles thinking. They're not asking themselves, hey, if there's a way to do it without slashing, shouldn't I definitely investigate that? Shouldn't I satisfy myself that there's something wrong with that idea? They're not doing that. They're just sticking with the herd. So they never made this Cardano bet. And now we've gotten to this point in Cardano where Cardano ADA is no longer single digit cents. They didn't make that bet back in those days. In fact, they didn't even make the bet that would have led them to investigate what was going on. They didn't even look into it. They didn't even read the papers. They didn't even read the Twitter posts about the papers. And now we've gotten too far down the road. And the only path left for them is just to reject this whole Cardano idea because they didn't even have the intellectual wherewithal to investigate the idea in the first place. Maybe the funniest part is that they're going to do exactly the same thing with governance. We in Cardano have been talking about governance for years, and they're just going to ignore it until we have full governance in place. And the decisions in their ecosystem are still being made on a non transparent basis by a small group of individuals who were empowered by who knows what means. But where does this lead? What how does this information asymmetry actually manifest itself in the real world? One way we can track this is through rankings like this. So these are the top brand intimacy rankings at mblm.com. And you can see these are all very known name brands in these top tiers here. We've got Disney, Tesla, Apple, Sony, YouTube, Android, Netflix, Trader Joe's, Mercedes, Sega, Costco, Porsche, Amazon, Nvidia, Prime, Whole Foods, Ford. What do we have here at 26? Cardano. You notice there's no other cryptocurrency ecosystems in here whatsoever until you get to Cardano. And then number 30 below Cardano is Bitcoin. And you're probably thinking, okay, but in the next tier, nipping at Cardano and Bitcoin's heels are going to be the other blockchain ecosystems. Let's take a look. Nope. 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 Nothing. I don't see any. Maybe I'm missing them, but I don't see any. Where do we have to go? Clear down here. Oh, we get to 111 and 120, and we finally find Polkadot and Ethereum. This, to me, is exactly what I would expect to see in the case of a huge information asymmetry. Switching to current day Cardano, we're pretty much seeing exactly what you'd expect if you made this bet back in the early days of Cardano and you realize there was going to be this ongoing information asymmetry. What you'd see is the Cardano ecosystem getting stronger and stronger, gradually, sure, experiencing the crazy parabolic highs and even crazier crashes that are just inherent in the whole crypto across the crypto ecosystem. But in terms of the actual growth of real things in the ecosystem, we've seen this gradual growth that seems unstoppable. It's not this like crazy, insane, growth where all of a sudden we surge past Ethereum and we're the number 2 blockchain in the entire ecosystem. It's more what you'd expect when you have an information asymmetry like this, when people never really understood what was going on over here. You'd see this gradual growth. And in 2024, it's taking the form of things like this. This is a post that says, exciting news alert. I'm thrilled to announce a groundbreaking development from the Swiss 6 exchange. Today, I had the honor of ringing the bell to officially launch the listing of the Cardano staking ETP by Liquid. I'm assuming ETP here stands for Exchange Traded Product by Liquid. So this is really interesting. Liquid, of course, is a Cardano DeFi project that's been with us for a long time in the early building stages, all the way through to launch, to the current day. And now we see them actually listing a Liquid product on the Swiss 6 exchange. This is something that would have been unfathomable just a couple of years ago in Cardano. You could imagine maybe IOG pulling off something like this, but not a single project inside the Cardano ecosystem. I think things like this are just going to keep happening with more and more frequency because the Cardano ecosystem is built on these very sound fundamental ideas that are a product of first principles thinking. And so the projects that come out of Cardano, because they might not see this crazy parabolic insane growth, but I think you're going to see this continuous ongoing gradual growth just like this. While this is obviously a very different magnitude of endeavor, the listing efforts over on the Ethereum side may not be going quite as well. Here's a post from Jake Chervinsky, who certainly knows a thing or two about what's going on in terms of crypto policy in Washington, and the ETH ETF, its fate is certainly going to be a product of that policy, whatever it happens to be. And I think we all know what it currently is. We just don't know what it'll be in, say, a year. So he posts, it brings me no joy to be an ETH ETF bear. I've been working for Ethereum in one sense or another for 5+ years. I want the ETF to be approved. It should be, but I'm calling it like I see it. And I can see an SEC that dislikes crypto as a concept, sees no value in the technology, and thinks attacking it is politically advantageous. seeks to please progressive elected officials and third-party observers who have made anti-crypto a core of their platform and vocally criticized the SEC for approving spot BTC ETFs, even after the Grayscale opinion here. There, he's obviously referencing the Dragon and her staff, who apparently are among the many, her proteges apparently are among the many Biden administration appointees crafting our domestic economic policy. 3 has a wrong but not insane basis for denial regarding spot futures correlation, which might be foreclosed by the Grayscale opinion, but not necessarily given how the DC Circuit framed its ruling as a failure by the SEC to justify its position, not as an absolute judgment on the correlation issue. Yes, could come up with new grounds for denial that weren't tested by Grayscale in court, which would likely also be subject to a court challenge, but maybe easier for the SEC to justify. And 5 is willing to take litigation risk and losing court based on a preference for being viewed as fighters in a war against crypto rather than being accused of rolling over. Yep, that's definitely true. As of now, appears to be making little effort to work on the details necessary for approval and listing, instead seeming to focus on diligence regarding correlation, perhaps to build up its basis for denial. I think Jake Chervinsky is correct here. He says, to be clear, I'm not saying there's no chance to be approved this year. I'm just saying the general sentiment in this early mid bull market is overestimating the chance of approval given all the political and strategic factors weighing against. And I think he's right. It's not looking good for an ETH ETF if you were waiting for that SEC approval. And I know people are talking about it at all times. I agree with him on his points here. All of these things seem to cut against the any kind of certainty that we would get an ETH ETF approval. You know what's really satisfying in a broken political system where your two choices are Father Time and his twin brother Orange Father Time? It's when you get a candidate who's saying things like this. These are quotes from recent RFK Jr. interviews. He says things like this: I'm going to make this country the most crypto friendly country in the world. Really? More than El Salvador? You bastard, I'm in. I'm in. Let's do this. Fiat currency is the way that wars are financed. When wars used to be financed by gold, they would end when the gold ran out. Now they never end because we can just print money all the time. If we had cryptocurrency as a central part of our monetized economy, it would inject discipline into that process and it would decrease the chances for war. I don't know if I can totally buy into this, but I definitely like this first part. Most crypto-friendly country in the world. It's a way to rebuild the middle class and to provide an on-ramp, off-ramp from this monopolistic, globalized banking system. Now you are taking a page right out of our crypto Austrian economics book. During the Great Depression, there were over 3,000 local currencies in our country, and that's where we need to be moving back toward more currencies to rebuild the American middle class and not make them slaves to the Fed. I'm all for not making the American middle class slaves to the Fed. That sounds good. There's only one candidate who's pro crypto, and that's me. Kind of true among the 3 candidates. That's kind of true. There were other people, like seems like there were some other candidates for the Republican nomination who are pretty pro crypto. But among the candidates left, I think he's kind of right. I mean, Trump has used crypto to raise funds, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's too pro crypto. But he did seem to be pretty hands off crypto during his administration. But I would have to say, as far as being truly pro crypto, there's some truth in this. RFK Jr. may be the only truly pro crypto candidate. President Biden's administration has been extraordinarily hostile to it. True. Very true. The SEC has been trying to destroy crypto. The pressure on the banks to not accept crypto and the banks that have accepted it have been punished for it. Yeah, that's all kind of true too. We can think of who didn't get saved during the recent banking crisis, and those were the banks that were involved in crypto. Some of them. President Trump said earlier this week when he was asked about crypto, "I believe in one currency, and it's the dollar. So I don't think either of these candidates is a friend to crypto." Yeah, I would say at this point, RFK Jr. is definitely the most crypto friendly of the 3 big candidates. If you think he is the 3rd big candidate. And I like this kind of talk. Any candidate who says stuff like this, I'm going to make this country the most crypto-friendly country in the world. And basically, if you are young enough that you don't fall down steps, then you probably are younger than the 2 Father Time candidates. This all sounds good to me. Sometimes I love community notes on X. Check this out. So Charles posted this. Remember that cryptocurrency Reddit engages in censorship. Anything associated with IOG, Cardano, or me has to either be negative or banned. There isn't a middle ground. The Edinburgh Decentralization Index is one of the most important metrics for our industry. It's based on science, and you'll understand that we had a little trouble posting about the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. And here we see the cryptocurrency subreddit moderators. They're posting on X to respond to Charles's post on X, which is kind of hilarious. They say brigading is against Reddit site-wide rules and our subreddit rules. If you link a post on Telegram or Discord or whatever and encourage a bunch of your fellow blockchain network enthusiasts to come up to vote a particular post, to come upvote a particular post and leave positive comments, then it will get removed. We get the community note. Brigading is not what was happening on Reddit concerning the Cardano blockchain posts. Reddit downvotes and removes everything Cardano, IOHK, Charles Hoskinson related. Other articles written about other blockchains, which are clearly brigading, go freely without being censored. I think the community notes on X are a fine, fine addition to social media. Finally, more news on the real world adoption side of things. Check out this post. Criminal investigations secured by the Cardano blockchain. Today, the Dubai police presented at the World Police Summit in Dubai an exciting blockchain based pilot project. The project will showcase how sensitive data from criminal investigations can be shared securely with authorities such as Interpol. Concretely, bullet scans done by a highly sophisticated scanner are shared among international stakeholders on the Cardano blockchain. The blockchain ensures that the data is not tampered with and can be tracked among various stakeholders. Making sure that data can be securely shared and managed in a decentralized network of stakeholders is becoming more and more relevant in industries from energy defense to Internet of Things. Blockchain technology can be one of the enabling tools for that. And of course, I'm always saying blockchains make terrible databases, but for certain types of data where the biggest metric might be authenticity, um, accuracy, um, censorship resistance, modification resistance, these kind of things. Like if you are trying to convey data about a bullet that was involved in some kind of a crime, I think blockchains do make a lot of sense for this sort of database use case. This isn't really the database use case. This is more like just authenticating data use case. And I think some of these things, they wouldn't be the super sort of database intensive kind of use cases that blockchains are bad for. But then again, we are talking about the Dubai police. When it's a police department that famously thinks that Bugatti cop cars are a good use of funds, I guess you can expect this same selection of Cardano to translate over to your local sheriff's department. I hope you are having a fantastic March so far. I hope you're getting ready for a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.